think back, it was in the end of last year, the beginning of this year, I was talking to Dave and to run the idea past him if, what does he think about getting a local community together like Chicago's doing with NYNOG. Now they just passed their 6th event, which has been having pretty good turnouts. He confirmed it's a pretty good idea, and we kind of got a few people together and got the show on the road. So the 4 of us that really got this organized and really started moving, myself, Dave Temkin, who's up here, if you don't know him, Andrew Baird, standing over there in the blue shirt, and Jessica Smith. Why are we doing this? Really, in the end of the day, it's all about community, bringing the local community together. Network engineers, those interested in networking, students, any type of infrastructure professional living in New York, or outside the area if you've got an interest. Education, the networking component, getting together, having beers, having drinks, and having good conversation. Innovation, conversations lead to thoughts, and thoughts lead to innovation in areas we can improve upon. Agenda, pretty much know how it is. We're going to get started with the welcome and quick introduction to the panel from Dave, and then about 7:15-ish we'll start with the networking reception and have some drinks. All right, with that said, thanks everyone again, and I'm going to introduce Dave Temkin, who's going to talk about a little bit about the challenges of deploying network infrastructure in New York.
All right, cool. So thank you, Christian. This is going to be less than 10 minutes, just as a setup to the panel, meant to be somewhat lighthearted. I apologize if I offend anyone who has deployed infrastructure in New York, but it is a mess. I'm vice president of networks for Netflix. Everything to do with what what our team likes to say is everything that happens after you press play is what my team does. And so, slide distribution? No. Anyway, we have, 4 POPs in New York City now, not including what we also have in Newark, which is ridiculous if you think about the square miles that New York City encompasses. The fact that we have 4 network points of presence. If you look at the Midwest, we have like Chicago, and that somehow encompasses hundreds or thousands of square miles. So anyway, if you look at just the list in PeeringDB, which is not even remotely an exhaustive list of data centers, it's just a list of data centers where people interconnect from an IP perspective, not for financial generally, not for other industries, but just more or less internet IP interconnectivity. It's still a pretty long list, and if you look at this on a map, there we go. It's a cluster of something. So basically, almost everything is downtown, right? If you look really where all of the data centers are in Manhattan, I didn't purposely cut off that map. There's just nothing north of there, which incidentally, which I didn't do, if you overlay a floodplain map, is really conveniently aligned with where all those data centers are. And as we'll get to in a second, we'll talk about why that's really, really, really horrifically bad. So, I don't know how many of you walked down Broadway to get here, but I actually just took this an hour ago. I had another picture in this deck that wasn't that great that I took last night, and I walked by this and I was like, oh, that's even better. And if you look at this, I don't know if does this have a pointer? I don't think it does. Yeah. But anyway, if you look at this, sorry, I know, I'm trying to look past this, but you've got all kinds of crap in here. You've got some random electrical wire that's probably service for, I don't know, someone's life support. But you've got fiber and other communications cables draped over some random, probably gas pipe or sewage pipe over there. You've got all this, probably electrical conduit. You've got communications conduit down here. New York Times was nice enough to do a map, but which I'll get to in a second. But if you look at where that intersection is, that's just Zayo. And so that orange is their interstate fiber. So that orange fiber and the blue, which is their local fiber locally within Manhattan, is all sitting in that trench, just hanging out there. And so I really hope you're using protection if you have communications in the city. As I mentioned, New York Times, nice enough to do a map. You can see all the ridiculous stuff that's in any of these trenches. I don't know about you guys, but actually whenever I walk by one of these, I always like have to look in and have to see what's going on in there. I don't know what I think I'm gonna see, but this is usually what you see, which is everything. And it might as well be an archaeological dig, because there is infrastructure down there that was put in, you know, centuries ago at this point. There's DC cable down there still in many cases that it's just nearly impossible to pull it out. It's, you know, not energized anymore, but there's all kinds of infrastructure back to the telegraph days still hanging out down there. So I'm gonna tell you to not look too closely at this slide. Basically, that's a Verizon crew in the lower right-hand corner splicing fiber. That's a police-involved shooting right directly across from them.
So to let you know something, they were fixing my connection. So they actually, that was actually
They did some good.
your fault?
So that was Zayo, and that's not really Verizon.
Oh, okay.
And it was a Zayo fiber cut,
Okay.
and I got the email telling me that my line was not going to be up because somebody got shot.
I think that's probably an okay trade-off, if we're being honest. You know, we're just being honest here. So, but the ridiculous occupational hazards of doing anything in New York. Those of you who put it, I'll go past this slide so people don't have to look at a dead body. But anyway, if you think about what it takes to get permitting in this city in order to get any fiber, any infrastructure in the ground, it's insane. There's moratoriums based on day and time and on what street it is, and the phase of the moon and whatever else. And so it's basically a total pain in the ass. Even to enter a manhole to get in to do a repair is a massive hassle. Yet we still all centralize a massive amount of infrastructure around the city. Water hazard. So this is like the stairwell at 140 West Street in Sandy. 140 West Street, also the infamous CO that was just nearly destroyed in 9/11, right? And yet they rebuilt it, and that's what happens to it, is that it just floods. And that's because on that map, it is right next to the river, right by most of the other major data centers in Manhattan. Yet we continue to rebuild infrastructure into these things. So if you really look at where all the fiber is, it's not even like there isn't a better option, right? We've all decided to continue to grow infrastructure here, and sure, there's a little corner of the world that cares about latency down to the millisecond or sub-millisecond or nanosecond from an HFT perspective, and yeah, absolutely, there's no reason why that can't and shouldn't be on the island of Manhattan if you care about those things. But otherwise, from a actual communications density standpoint, a lot of what's here is the crossroads from Europe, from the south, from the north, but it kind of grew up around us, right? We have 60 Hudson, the Western Union Telegraph Building, and it's no longer telegraphs, but it's still a major communications hub. If you look at where all the population is, yeah, obviously New York is super important, but so is most of the rest of the Northeast Corridor. And yet, we don't have a large amount of density over in Jersey. We don't have a huge amount of density in the Philadelphia metropolitan area. Yet, the population density of the full metropolitan area is pretty darn large. We have a very, very, very thin slice of who's interconnected in Philadelphia. Most of that comes either, if you're in Philadelphia, it's coming up here or going down Ashford, Virginia. So, what we're going to talk about in this panel is why do we still interconnect here? Like, we have all of these hazards, right? We have all of these reasons why we shouldn't keep opening new data centers, especially not on the river. We shouldn't keep opening data centers. Let's talk about why we continue to do that, and how we do that. So with that, I think we'll start the panel. You want me to introduce you? You're the host now, but
All right. New York's the greatest city in the world.
I don't disagree.
False. Welcome and thank you to all of our panelists. Dave, we've got Dave. He introduced himself briefly, Vice President, Network Architecture and Strategy at Netflix. Adam Rothschild over here, directly to my left, co-founder and SVP Infrastructure at Packet.
Since my hair is cut off partially.
Excellent. It's an excellent picture, Adam. Next to Dave, we've got Neal Secher, Managing Director, Secher, sorry. Managing Director, Network Architecture, BNY Mellon. And we've got Nicholas Schmidt, independent consultant, formerly Intersection, Link, NYC, Media Math, and lots of other cool stuff.
Networker at large.
I can't believe you used my Facebook picture.
I couldn't find a good picture, it was last minute. All right, so we're going to get into this panel as Dave kind of set the stage for it, and hopefully everybody will get something out of this and learn something new.
I'm learning a lot.
All right, so we're going to start with Adam. Adam, when selecting sites, what are some factors that are considered when you make those decisions? Are there specific economic factors or performance? And overall, how does risk factor into making those decisions?
Should I use the mic or?
Yeah.
Sure. So first off, to Dave's point, I mean, this is actually some pretty current experience. I mean, my company has been in business for about 1.5 years. We opened a New York Metro data center about a year ago. And yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I mean, to Dave's point, what we had to do was basically automatically disqualify a lot of vendor options. I mean, just for all obvious reasons. I mean, post-Sandy concern, we don't want to deploy into a building that's at or close to sea level. We don't want to deploy into a non-purpose-built office building in Manhattan with some limited options in terms of power diversity and diverse generation for starters. And then when we kind of get all those concerns out of the way, what we do is we have somewhat of a financial model. I've actually been refining it for the past decade or so, crossing over a couple of employers. If you Google around on SlideShare for, I think, packet, data center, TCO, you can find a copy. It's there out in the community. People regularly give me feedback on it, and I tweak it. But what I ultimately arrive on is kind of what I call an all-in loaded dollar per kilowatt metric for hosting our infrastructure, really. I mean, and when I say loaded dollar per kilowatt, I mean, we go significantly beyond just basic space and power. I mean, we also factor in, for instance, and I think we're going to get to this later on in the panel, so I don't want to dwell on it too much now, but just when I think TCO, I think basically all communication costs, including cross-connection, just actually dark fiber ring from a data center to these inevitable but not fun, non-purpose-built buildings that are carrier hotels, like 165 Halsey, 111 8th Avenue, total carrying costs in terms of operating POPs in these areas just to interconnect with other networks and connect with other customers and vendors. And yes, so we kind of come to this loaded, all-in kind of metric, and then we use that to base the decision process.
Thank you. And Dave, with the diversity of the network, Netflix subscriber base, and the Open Connect program, and how you have embedded caches and ISP networks, how do you manage and look at risk and performance when it comes to deploying to these sites?
That's a good question. You know, to the Sandy point, we actually were more or less able to watch to see people lost power before they lost internet connectivity.
Yeah.
And so we would see swaths of people go offline, but they were watching the shit out of the service up until the minute that they went offline. So, for obvious reasons. But, you know, if we had a choice, we certainly wouldn't go and deploy a whole bunch of infrastructure for people out on Long Island and people in upstate New York and people in northern New Jersey here in Manhattan. And for that matter, even at 165 Halsey over in Newark, that building has its own issues. To your point, Adam. And so, in an ideal world, yeah, ISPs would put our caching equipment as close to those users as possible to eliminate that failure boundary, and we would put ourselves in a position where those centralized locations are only really needed to keep those caches full of new content. And that if those went offline, the worst case scenario is you have a cache miss. You don't actually have a user who presses play and then can't get their content. But instead, we're stuck in a world where we're, at 165 Halsey and 60 Hudson and 118th, and we pick up pieces and bits and pieces of connectivity at each one of those due to the 85 10th and so on and so forth, and pick up bits and pieces of connectivity at each of those locations because people have legacy networks. They continue to expand into those locations instead of looking forward and going, why would we take something like 85 10th or 60 Hudson for that matter, which was a stone's throw from being majorly screwed over in Sandy, and did have some major issues in Sandy, but was not totally taken offline. To do that and put all of those people's connectivity in harm's way, it just seems reckless. And we're in a world now where cell phone networks rely on IP communications to be stable. There's always what happens if grandma falls and breaks her hip and can't call 911. We're really entering a world where that's a reality for the internet, where the internet is going to be super important to that actually functioning, and we can't just look at it as, oh well, it'll fall over to POTS, or it'll fall over to 2G or whatever. We need to make sure that this infrastructure is reliable, and right now I don't feel like we're in that place.
Neal, looking at things from a bit of a different perspective, mobile banking, financial exchanges, how do you look at the risk when deploying sites? I mean, a lot of the exchanges are out in New Jersey and not even in Manhattan, so how do you kind of evaluate that type of situation?
Yeah, so I'll give you a little bit of a experience I had a couple years ago, not at Bank of New York Mellon, but a previous firm I was working at. We actually were trying to find a new site to deploy a data center, and we kind of loaded up a bunch of interested parties in a bus and drove around to different sites in New Jersey and kind of looked at them. The network guys were very interested in sites that were close to other sites, right? So who is our neighbors here and have they built connectivity into the region? And so, we were very interested in Carteret, New Jersey, for instance, because another major financial, NASDAQ is there and another major financial is there. And when one of our site planners pulled up on his iPad a picture, like an overview picture of the thing, he said, well, there's 95 here, there's an airport here, and there's all these big, oil containers and refineries here. Do you still think this is the best site for us to build this? So connectivity is an important part of it, but it's only one part of it. So, financials have the problem of regulation and, disaster recovery, and we don't have, while we have some modern apps, they're all not very modern. They're still built and do kind of legacy DR failover mechanisms that mean they're rooted in 2 data centers, but our users are primarily in the city. So, while our businesses and consumers of our applications are here, our users are actually, our applications are actually elsewhere, which is likely in Jersey, or Jersey in some place that's, Virginia or Texas, or, someplace that's certainly out of the disaster zone.
Cool, thank you, Neal. Nick, kind of been on both sides of the picture and at companies you've been in the past. How much does cost factor into when picking a site in the New York City metro?
So for the last month or so, I've been building, last year or so, I've been building NYC, replacing all of the phone booths with free Wi-Fi and wireless communications. Unfortunately, for me, for that specific role, cost not really a factor, just because we are bound by where the fiber goes. I don't have much of a choice to build out too much infrastructure outside of where the fiber provider is able to be delivered, where the fiber is able to be delivered. So I'm in a very unique circumstance, being a little bit last mile, but yeah. So cost is for that specific role was less of a factor than where I can get fiber delivered from thousands of fiber strands over the 5 boroughs. Previous jobs, very much cost is a major factor. Lincoln NYC, though, is a very unique circumstance.
Cool, thank you guys. Next question, we're going to move on to, start with Dave. Dave, over 20 million eyeballs in the New York City metro. There's over 6 internet exchanges, over 50, 60 data centers, over 30, 40 carriers. what are some factors, how are you dealing with carrier and interconnect fragmentation that's happening in multiple carrier hotels, such sites in New York City?
Yeah, and that was a little bit to my point earlier about, we've got these 4+ locations, and a lot of the legacy carriers have built their networks in such a way that they're stuck in these facilities. They don't want to invest in moving out into new facilities, but they're running into issues where they can't get more power in a lot of these existing facilities, right? So, a facility like 8510 is just out of power, or a facility like 111 Google thinks it's much better used as office space than data center space. And so if you need more space, you're screwed. They would much rather build, they kicked out a bunch of tenants to build a new elevator. It's really not high on the priority list. And so it puts us in a position where we have to be more agile and do things here that we really don't have to do anywhere else in the world. It is truly unique to New York. And sure, you can talk about 20 million eyeballs as being super important, and they are. But to have to do something completely custom to serve that when we've got a world full of billions of people is kind of insane. I think the internet exchange fragmentation in New York is kind of ridiculous. I don't think we need whatever the actual count is like 6 operational exchanges and 8 exchanges on paper. We need 1 or 2. And you do run into a situation where you have peers that are spread across different exchanges, and frankly, as a content provider, the onus more or less falls on you to be the one who's well connected, right? You tend to go a little bit further out of your way when you're the content provider to make sure that you're easily accessible. And frankly, that takes away a lot of the excuses that legacy networks have about why they won't interconnect with you if you put yourself in a position where you're easy to get to. And at that point, it just becomes a business discussion, not a technical one.
Right, and on top of that, just the cost between risers and between floors in some of these carrier hotels is really erroneous. I mean, $800 to $1,000 sometimes just for a cross connect.
I won't break any NDAs by saying what the price is. I will say it was absolutely ludicrous. Actually, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. We're in 5 locations in New York, not 4, because we're in Suite 518 in 118th. We're in Suite 524A in 118th. Can either of you guess the adjacency, how far from when you walk out the front door of one to where you walk in the front door of the other is?
20 feet.
A little less. And so there's nothing in between the two of them. I guess they left a couple numbers just in case they wanted to build a closet or something. But anyway, the number in order to get a cross connect between those 2 suites is in the high 3 to low 4 digits. It's insanity.
Adam, with taking into account what Dave said, internet exchanges and just interconnect in general, demand being really high, what kind of effect does this have on the local ecosystem? Is it positive? Is it negative?
Well, the fragmentation is very negative effect. I mean, to Dave's point, we're running a relatively small startup, but yet to have any sort of reasonable density and just reach the same interconnection partners consistently between markets, we basically have had to deploy into basically 4 carrier hotels, and I believe the last count, 4 exchanges in the area, and it's just insanity, just in terms of CapEx and OpEx for deployment, and having to troubleshoot a dark fiber ring and DWDM on top of that with the limited operations staff. I mean, it's really difficult. Our ideal would be to connect to 2 exchanges in 2 buildings for basic diversity, but at the same time, market realities just don't allow us to do so. And I would also add to Dave's point with the whole just kind of post-Sandy, all eggs in Manhattan basket concern. What we're finding is like a lot of networks, like the more established broadband networks and some international networks as well, are deployed solely into Manhattan and nowhere outside of Manhattan. And even interconnection aside, just buying IP transit off the island is somewhat difficult. I mean, I'm not going to go down the list of names, but there are a number of major MSOs and national and international carriers that simply do not sell IP transit in New Jersey, even in a dense carrier hotel like 165 Halsey, and there are others that do have very small leaf site there but are still critically dependent on Manhattan, so they really don't give you any DR benefit to connecting them out of Jersey, so it's a definite problem.
Thanks, guys. With that said, what does the future of interconnection and connectivity look like in the New York City metro? Are there alternatives to these sites in Manhattan, and what's it going to take to get people to realize that there are viable solutions and to start going there and populating them? Sorry, let's start with Dave.
You don't always have to start with me. We can hand it down to Nick or Neal. Is Hunter here? No? Okay, good. I can say this. So, like, bringing 325 Hudson online as, like, an interconnection center is completely pointless. Like, we need to stop putting data centers in lower Manhattan, period. And it's just feeding the beast. And sorry to the various people in the room who have also brought data centers online in lower Manhattan in the last few quarters. But there's, sure, people will fill it up because it's easy from a fiber proximity perspective, but it's certainly not solving the problem. And, frankly, there's an awful lot of farmland in northeastern Pennsylvania that would make for good data center sites if we could just get cheap power out there. But continuing to more or less build up density here is counterproductive. And we're going to be in a situation where we're going to have another disaster. It's going to happen. We don't know what it is going to be, but it's going to happen. And to Adam's point, we're just continuing to build these interdependencies between locations. We're not resolving any of those interdependencies at this point. We're putting ourselves in a position where those interdependencies are getting more and more complex. They're harder and harder to map out. For people who design networks, it is getting way harder for them to understand the interdependencies between their individual vendors and their upstream vendors, i.e. who puts the fiber in the ground for them, who builds the data center, who owns the building, yada, 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 who provides the diesel fuel, like all of these crazy interdependencies that we create. And by continuing to build density here in a place where all of those various things are way harder to deal with than they are in most any other city in the world, seems to be a huge, grave mistake to make.
Thanks, Dave. Neal, what does connectivity look like in the future in New York City? Do we start to see more wireless? I mean, how do you see that landscape changing?
So I'm going to build on Dave's point maybe first. I think there's a reason why everything in New York is so interesting, and it's really because it's it's encapsulated by water. And so all those data centers that Dave showed were curiously clustered around the Holland Tunnel and to other kind of tunnels that go from New York to New Jersey, right? So these things are happening for a reason. The population in New York City is very high. Whether this is your data center or this is your user base, it's still a connectivity problem. I think that from a enterprise perspective, what we're seeing is we pay tremendous amount of money for an MPLS connection, and a lot of people are looking at SD-WAN as a possible solution, which is going to take broadband internet and make it your primary connectivity model. And so what happens if there's an internet problem? All of your users cannot connect to your applications anymore. It sort of exacerbates the problem. So I don't know if building data centers just in Pennsylvania is sort of the answer, because our users are still here.
It's not the answer.
Now, the future of connectivity, I mean, so again, previous firms and previous lives, we kind of tested a lot of the wireless stuff, and I was having a conversation about this yesterday, kind of looking back on it and how crazy it was, and whether we were going to hire meteorologists to understand if our trading desks were going to be up that day, or whether they were going to be off their microwave connections, right? So, yeah, wireless could be an option if it were more reliable, but there's still atmospheric problems that means that people are going to fall back to fiber in the ground.
Thanks. Nick, let's move over to you. Tailing on to the wireless part, since you have some experience deploying that at scale recently. How does connectivity look to you in the future of New York City, and not just for the people of New York City and users, but for companies looking to build out that presence?
Yeah, sure. So, I would love for the future to be I would love to disconnect the data center and the data center ecosystem from the interconnection ecosystem at the moment, which I think, not to mean this is a plug for Christian's company, but a lot of elastic interconnection companies like Megaport have been popping up where they'll build 30 connectivity sites on every data center in New York. You buy your 2 cross connects there for redundancy, and they manage all of the hard stuff, all of the expensive cross connects between sites. I think that works for like 95% of the businesses out there, where I can just buy 2 cross connects to a elastic connectivity provider and connect to anyone within that ecosystem, completely disambiguated from the data center provider itself. I would love to see that be very, very successful ecosystem.
Thanks, Nick. Adam, do you have something else for Nick?
Yeah, just very briefly about Adam. I think really, from a fundamental infrastructure perspective, it feels we're finally there in some ways. I mean, for the first time in however long, we have exchange points that are popping up in North Jersey. Like, hats off to the folks at DKIX and NYX for doing a pop in 165 Halsey, which, while not the be-all end-all, I mean, it has some of the same single points of failure, is a good option in concert with other pops for some diversity. You see IXPs that are cropping up kind of more on terra firma, like in Piscataway, New Jersey, other areas, but at the same time, just the move of networks, and specifically some of the larger networks, like international networks, even some of the MSOs in or around the New York Metro, to these exchanges, just that migration has been glacial at best. And what we as a community really need to do, and I mean, it's really, there needs to be pressure coming from interconnection partners, from customers, even account reps at some of these IXPs and colos, but we as a community just need to pressure these peer networks more and more to diversify and, so, if not replace, at least augment their legacy infrastructure in Manhattan.
Yeah, and that's still for you, Adam.
Sorry.
We touched on 111 8th a little bit and how Google wants to continue to make that office space, and they're really taking over that whole corridor from 8th Avenue all the way west to next to Super Pier, which they're going to take over 200,000 square feet of office space. How relevant is 111 8th Ave today, and when does that relevance really start to disappear?
I would say, for better or for worse, though mostly for worse, it is critically relevant. I mean, really, we cannot interconnect at scale without having some sort of a presence, however small, at 111 8th. And for me, the larger concern isn't so much that 111 8th is going away. I mean, I think a lot of kind of the FUD around that is manufactured to some degree. I mean, yes, constrained building, but at the same time, I mean, you have people that are opting not to renew their leases and then kind of spinning it negatively with the press, claiming they were kicked out of the building when in fact they were not. So definitely a certain FUD factor there, but more, I think the concern is, as people migrate out of 111 8th, they're going to, and I mean no disrespect to anyone in the room, but they're going to move to 85 10th and 60 Hudson and other nearby buildings, and they're just really abandoning the problem.
Well, and do you see an issue for 85 10th anytime in the future? Because Google's starting to move more office space in there as well now.
I don't have any first-hand knowledge.
I don't know if anyone up here knows specifically. I'll pontificate on it, which is that I would imagine that given the stuff we're doing with the pier, the fact that they don't actually own 85 10th, the fact that 85 10th is not for sale, who actually owns 85 10th? I think so, yeah. I think it's actually a city building, and I don't think the city...
No, it's privately held.
Is it?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, regardless, so far as I know, and all the rumors that I hear about what's for sale and what's not, I've never heard of 85 10th being for sale. I'm sure Google, if anyone was going to pay for it, it'd probably be Google, whatever the price is. But I just, you know, for example, Verizon has a ton of space in there. I don't see them moving out of that anytime soon. Level 3 has a ton of space in there. I'm assuming, I would hope that they have very long-term leases on that space and they're not going anywhere anytime soon. To Adam's point, you know, 111 8th, if you talk to the Google folks, you know, yes, they do desire to have contiguous office space. It's no mistake that they bought one of the, you know, basically I think it's the third largest building from a floor plate perspective in the city. They want it to be Mountain View Part 2, right? It's no real mystery there. But at some point, they have to answer to the internet, given that they are a big part of the internet, and I really don't expect them to continue to build more Google Vaders. They're going to kick people out of their suites.
Thanks, Dave. Start with Neal on the next question. Applications are becoming more network aware, and software engineers are becoming smarter with the way they write their code. How important is it? We talked about this a little bit earlier in some points, but how important is it to be close to your users for applications with a large user base?
I mean, for us, it's important. You know, we have a worldwide user base, and we don't just deploy stuff in the United States, right? We try to position content close to users, not like Dave does, but in a smaller way. I think what's actually intersecting that a little bit more is, as applications are becoming cloud portable and can be taken out of our own data centers and potentially run in an Amazon or a Google or an Azure, we are still trying to figure out what that means. And, does my data need to be close to my application? Can my data still sit at home and deal with a 30 millisecond round trip time? And that seems to be more the focus than if my users, how far my users are away. Truthfully, again, we're regional, but within the United States, we don't have too many problems within financial services specifically.
Dave, coming back to you, because I think Netflix is very advanced in the way they write their applications. How do you guys see this issue? If you wanted to, could you just serve New York users, New Jersey users from the Midwest if you wanted to?
Yeah, and we've done it. I mean, it works. Our application, certainly, we care about latency, but we don't care about latency in the same way that Neal cares about latency. 10 milliseconds doesn't make a huge difference in startup time. It's noticeable, but in reality, the way that we'll get past that is improvements in the application, right? If you hover over something for long enough, we'll assume that you're probably going to want to try to watch it, and we'll grab a few seconds of it, right? So your startup time is nearly instant. That's how you solve for latency, right? We're not Twitch, we're not doing gaming, so we don't really care about the interactivity piece of it. So yeah, from our perspective, if there was a bunch of fiber, and fiber in the ground is only getting cheaper, not more expensive in any way, shape, or form. If there's a bunch of fiber that puts us in a position where our facilities are less vulnerable, for sure we would certainly do that.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think we'll start to see a lot more of that as time evolves.
What about you as Edge Cloud?
Adam, from your perspective, you're technically a bare metal cloud hoster, so your customers kind of vary all across the spectrum. How important is that to you, or how do you see that evolve?
Yeah, I think especially just catering to a very diverse space of customers as we do. There's a lot of opinions on the subject. I mean, ultimately, I think there is a small handful of people that have a legitimate need for it. We have some customers that are interacting with various financial exchanges in the region. We have others that are running CDNs of sorts and do have a legitimate need. And I think there also is some kind of philosophical element to it, like kind of the server hugger crowd, and kind of more of a perceived need than an actual need. So I think it really cuts both ways.
Cool, thank you. We're going to move on to the last question, which is for everybody. We're going to start with Nick at the end. Nick, what advice would you give companies looking to establish a presence in New York City today?
I mean, a big part of New York City infrastructure right now, as we touched on many times, is fragmentation. You need to know where your traffic is going, who your carriers are going to be, where you need to connect to. Putting infrastructure in the location which is separate from people you need to connect with is, especially within 111 8th or 60 Hudson, or these big carrier hotels, you're risking a long lead time to get turned up, just to get that cross connect done from one suite to another, or one suite to a meeting room if the person you're trying to connect to is not necessarily in there, and it's going to be very, very expensive. That would be my very first piece of advice. I would just be trying to build infrastructure in New York is know who you're connecting to. Buying space and power, you're also buying into an interconnectivity ecosystem that you need to keep on top of and make sure that people you need to connect to are going to be within there, able to work with you.
Thanks, Nick. Back to Neal.
Yeah, I think it's important to hire the right people, right? I think within the enterprise, there's not a lot of people around who understand how to read DLRs and understand, the paths that their fiber take and why that's important and understand all the failure scenarios. And truthfully, the market hasn't educated us that much on it either. So, we're very willing, or it's very easy to sell us a circuit, but not actually tell us, where exactly it's going and call it, intellectual property. But at the end of the day, if my 2 redundant circuits that I thought actually take a hit because one pop goes down, that's really just going to be against your business anyway, right? So, it's about hiring the right people. It's about transparency with the carriers and where the routes are, and I think those are 2 important points.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Neal.
Apologies to all the sales guys in the room again. Don't listen to sales guys, or women, or salespeople, sorry. In general, to both Nick and Neal's point, the information is out there about what you need. So if you're coming to New York to interconnect with someone or to deliver traffic in some specific way, there are lots of ways to locate fiber. There are third-party services that aggregate all of the fiber maps into one single location. You can figure out who is where in what buildings. It's super easy for a salesperson to tell you, oh yeah, this carrier's in our building. But what they forget to tell you is, oh, that's a $1,500 a month cross connect to get to them through some ridiculous riser. So you need to do your own research on what that looks like. Don't just listen to, and to Neal's point, hire the right people who know how to do this research. It's super easy to get caught in a trap of, oh, this seems like it's easy. There's a list of this stuff. I can go cross-reference this list and check all the boxes. Everything looks fine. I guarantee you, no single pop that we've ever built in New York has ever, gotten built based on checking all the boxes. It's gotten built based on a lot of research that we've had to do, and there's always obstacles that you run into that you just don't expect, and it's way easy to get overpromised and underdelivered.
Real quick, Dave, what are some of those free resources available to people publicly to help with their desktop studies?
I showed a picture of PuringDB earlier. The only kind of weakness of PuringDB is the fact that the data itself is user-generated, so the authoritative source of it is who puts that data in, and people can certainly fudge it. We've seen that in the past. There are services like, I think it's fiberlocator.com or something like that you pay either like $300 a month or $100 per use, and you go plug in a building address or plug in a metro and get basically the fiber that goes everywhere, at least the fiber that the NSA will let you know about, that goes everywhere in a metro to find out basically what that looks like, which is generally actually more accurate than the carrier themselves maps. And there's a few other things.
Cool. Thanks, Dave. Adam, leading by example, on to you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so just want to echo what Neal said. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a very challenging market. You really need to hire the right kind of subject matter expertise on the physical layer. I mean, we have it a little bit easier than some folks because we're buying dark fiber, but still at the end of the day, just a lot of due diligence needed. We need to look at our route maps in a very granular manner, like look at specific manholes traversed, look at entrances into facilities. I mean, another kind of dirty secret of the area is there's a lot of aerial fiber and a lot of aerial entrances into facilities that really isn't immediately obvious unless you do the right kind of due diligence, and that very concept scares me a lot. I mean, right now we have like the Communication Workers Union on strike, and I'm just reminded of like how easy it is to go to Home Depot, buy a pair of bolt cutters for $20, and just think of the kind of damage you can do on some of the POEs into some of these facilities. So yeah, it's just really onerous on the customer to do the necessary due diligence. And I mean, dark fiber aside, just buying lit service, buying IP, it's the same problem. Just find out what the dependencies are, find out whether you're connecting to a leaf node or a core node for a carrier, and just because a carrier purports to be in a building, they might not actually be there. They might be riding the same backhaul to a major carrier hotel that you're riding, so there's questionable diversity. And physical layer aside, just another challenge of the market that we haven't really spoken to, but I just want to touch on briefly. It's just on the interconnection side, as we've discussed before, like it is, I believe, the densest census metropolitan statistical area in the US, and at the same time, look at the landscape for people who are buying residential and business broadband. I mean, we have some outliers, like for instance, Cablevision and RCN are great to work with and very professional on the interconnection side. But look at the big incumbents, like you have folks like Verizon and Comcast, and up until recently with the merger, Time Warner Cable, who are extremely congested at the edge, and it's just very difficult to reach by way of any third-party transit provider without paying them, what's basically tantamount to kind of slumlord monopoly style rents. So for that alone, it's a very challenging market.
Thanks, Adam. All right, thanks, guys. Questions?
Hi, Gil Santeles, and I'm glad I came today. We've got a facility 60 miles from here. That's where the cables actually land, transatlantic and coming from Brazil onto the shores of New Jersey. And we've taken what you said and we've actually built a carrier-neutral, purpose-built facility that's Tier 3 at a cable landing station, 60 miles from New York City. We don't charge for cross connects. We have 4 POEs underground for the building. Next door, the actual cable landing itself that Tata still owns. We run the meet me room for them, and we make sure that we have a fair platform for cross connects happening. We have 8 metro providers in the facility that have dark fiber availability going south to Ashburn, and everyone comes up to New York City. I know it's a new project. I'd love to share with anyone in the room more about it, but I think we're helping towards the issue of New York City is congested. There's lots of infrastructure here, but we have an alternative to Halsey Street, which I agree was never meant to be more than a Bamberger's, and it's a great facility for that, but now it's got something that's much more important.
Come on, it's got some great clothing stores in the lower level.
Right.
Good street food also.
Great Brazilian food, only a
Yeah.
few blocks away. I mean, best Brazilian food in the U.S.
And not to do an
Got some good
infomercial,
bootleg
Portuguese
DVDs
don't
also
go there
there.
at 9 o'clock at night.
Yeah, just a
So
good
September 21st, we're having a grand opening. Everyone in the room is invited. We're having a big headliner with Mario Andretti and lots of hoopla. But it's really a facility that's going to do exactly what you're saying. The subsea folks are actually there. They're enjoying the fact they don't have to buy backhaul from just one provider anymore. They're going to have 8 options to connect to New York now. 8 options go down to Ashburn, Chicago, Dallas. So we're trying to tackle this issue that you guys have highlighted today, but we've got a really good solution we'd like to share at some point.
Yeah, I would say superficially, hats off to you, and just the only kind of advice and feedback I would impart as a would-be customer is, in addition to just targeting customers, make sure the carrier ecosystem is very well engaged as well.
And one of the things we're making when the carriers do is sit down with you and show their KMZ files, so you see exactly the routes. Start with the parkways, I'm going to stay away from the parkways, and the turnpike. They have different routes they all take, but you do need to know how they get back to New York, how they get down to Ashburn, how they get to Halsey. All the data centers that exist need to have a clear understanding of the dark fiber routes. And having been a dark fiber provider in the past, I'm familiar with outside plant, and we make sure that they show you the sheath on their cable. We'll walk you down to the fiber vaults and show you their splice cases, and you know that it's really a Verizon cable, a Cavalier owned by Windstream, whatever it happens to be. We're completely transparent in helping you guys understand how your networks really work.
Cool.
Again, sorry. With the proliferation or kind of the increase in the usage of SD-WAN, do you see, I guess, a time where more enterprises kind of move towards interconnection, and by that I mean doing peering on IXs as opposed to purchasing, IP transit from, or IP from your tier 1s, tier 2s?
Yeah, potentially, right? So I was at a conference two weeks ago or something like that where someone got up and said, look, I've reduced my WAN cost by 90% by doing an SD-WAN solution, right? And there were touting the voice quality that they got that was better than their MPLS network. And the way that they did it was by staying on single carrier the whole way and being very craftful about how they were kind of using the internet. So yeah, right. So as you become more reliant on the internet for business critical services, you're going to educate yourself on it. That will just happen. So I definitely think so.
Yeah, I think SD-WAN is great to some degree. I mean, we've been kind of early adopters of Christian's company's product, Megaport, and to use them as an example, I mean, I think it's a really great mechanism for, especially kind of on the lower end of the spectrum, like enterprises, some service providers, like people in the 1 gig and 10 gig kind of ballpark, just to connect to one another without the need for potentially very expensive physical cross-connect and between buildings within a market or even between markets. I think it's a great concept. I just wish we had SD dark fiber as well.
We can software define anything you'd like.
Yeah.
Good point.
You just put it in the cloud.
Yeah. Right on.
Any more questions?
Well, just a statement. I'm compelled to, since we're promoting, just compelled to address.
Let's not.
Just address one piece of information. So at 8510, it's level 3 that's out of power, not the building.
There was, I think, an actual question. Or, here.
60 Hudson did not take on 1 inch of water during Sandy, never down. So just want to put that on record too.
We appreciate that.
I was in the lobby of 60 Hudson 4 days after Sandy. I can assure you it was not normal operations. But let's not debate that. Okay.
No, the interconnection is plenty
I think the
down.
can of
There was
worms-
a lot of yeah. We could open a whole can of worms on this. Anyway, that's Walt.
No water.
Wait, hold on.
So why do the providers keep building downtown? We've had 2 major significant events.
That's a great question.
With the trade centers and with Sandy.
Fiber proximity. It's an easy sell. It's super easy, and the buildings existed, right? So obviously, the stuff that's way on the river over there. But what's the one over in the river over on this side? Sabi, yeah. Like, okay, so you've got an old Verizon building. What else are you going to do with it? Makes an easy data center. Like
Where you can't buy Verizon IP.
right.
I mean, as somebody who's actually built out very recently in a carrier hotel in downtown Manhattan, a lot of that has to do with just, that's where the fiber is, that's where the conduit is, like, that's where ISPs are, and that's not changing anytime soon.
No one wants to put the capex into picking up and moving that.
It's a collective action problem. Everyone's there, and nobody has any incentive to move.
Intelligence moving into the apps, Netflix. You could serve the East Coast out of Chicago.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there needs to
It's
be.
cheap in New York. Why not put it there and back up out
I
there?
mean, in terms of like getting the carriers out, I mean, I think it's just, it's like traditional risk aversion. I mean, we're talking about like the Verizons of the world. I mean, when you are in kind of this incumbent monopoly position, I mean, customers will build wherever the carrier is built. It's simple as that. But definitely needs to be as much pressure as possible on the buy side. I just can't speak to that enough.
Wait, hold on. You got one up here, and then go to Reed.
So if Reed bought Sunday Ticket, right? And
Not that Reed.
No,
Reed
not
Hastings.
that Reed. If Reed Hastings bought Sunday Ticket, or whoever your CEO has said, we want to have connectivity, live connectivity between whoever your reps are and the customers, and maybe we're going to launch our own financial service channel, on a live basis. How do any of these decisions change, or how do any of these factors that you've talked about get more complicated as opposed to just storing content in one location and delivering it when a couple of people want to watch one program?
Yeah, if you think about, for example, what Level 3 has done with VivX, right? They've kept it actually pretty separate from the rest of the Level 3 network. The people who operate VivX are still separate from the Level 3 NOC. And I would think it would be pretty bad if you put yourself in a position where any of your infrastructure for, say, if you spent $1 billion, whatever the ridiculous price tag is for Sunday ticket, if you put that infrastructure in New York City, to me, it would just seem reckless. I want to put that somewhere that is way more survivable than just the Northeast corridor.
But if the Giants are playing the Cowboys, it's a huge game.
Yep.
How do you
I mean, at that
scale
point,
it to
at that
deliver
point-
to all the people in New York that want to watch the game?
Well, fiber's cheap, right? So, you put it somewhere else that is not nearly as delicate as New York City's infrastructure is. And the fiber back to New York already exists, and we're just getting exponentially better. We're actually beating Moore's Law on how to use fiber, although that's really Shannon's law of fiber. But regardless, we're still beating everything else from a network perspective as far as what we can multiplex on a single strand of fiber. And yet even on top of that, we're still adding more fiber. So put it somewhere else and haul it back here. 10 milliseconds is not going to matter for football. No one, you can't, your eyes can't perceive 10 milliseconds.
In terms of the video question, I mean, I think, consumer-based video, person to person, has really been an eye-opener for enterprises in that it's so easy. I can do it on my phone, I can do it over LTE, and it's a pretty good experience. So this is why another one of those reasons that SD-WAN is, gaining in prominence, because we just want to take it and dump it out to the internet and use that as a delivery method. At the end of the day, if I can't have that video experience, I want to have, I can still have a phone experience. I have a backup, right? We are, continuing to look at those type of solutions. I think the big issue for us has been like regulation and, how do I capture the video and how do I make sure that what happened on the video channel can be audited and we know what was said between two parties when that's pretty easy on a recorded phone or on a recorded chat channel. It's not technical. That tends to be the problem in those use cases.
All right, we got one more question, and I see some thirsty faces in the crowd.
I can just say that, we're at a New York event, and we're talking about New York users, but I can tell you when I'm in Singapore and Hong Kong and wherever the heck else I go, no one is asking about any building other than 111 8th Avenue or 60 Hudson.
Yep.
That's it.
I agree.
So
That's the
we're
problem.
talking about the crossroads of the world, and we can talk about the fact that we live here and we'd like to be in New Jersey or White Plains or Long Island or everything else. But like it or not, New York is known for a building, LA is known for a building, etc. You're going to have to live with it, and hopefully we'll work something out. But I look at the requests coming in, and they're not coming in for some building out somewhere else.
Yeah, I would say just one point on that is, I don't know if you bought power on Wilshire lately, but I think that will eventually exceed a pain point, and the pain point is greater than 2 major outages in a decade of the business terms of it being untenable, whether that's Google kicking people out or buildings becoming full or power running out or whatever it is. And we'll be able to move that conversation worldwide once that happens. And I think our jobs are to try to prep people for that conversation and try to hopefully make it so that we're not in a position where it's all of a sudden an emergency. And so I think there's a lot that everyone in this room here can do as people who operate or manage networks in New York to start that. And some of that may be untenable because it's CapEx intensive. And people just have to judge what that looks like, but you also have to think about what happens 3 or 4 years from now when it's an emergency, and then what does that CapEx look like then?
Thanks, guys. We've got about a couple more minutes before we wrap up, so a big thank you to the panel.
I'd like to put it to Andrew. Got a few things to talk about and wrap up, and some really cool giveaways if you drop your business card in front.
Thanks, Christian. Yes, thank you everyone for coming to the first NYNOG. This is brought to you by Megaport, Netflix, Digital Realty Telex, DigitalOcean, maybe more to come in the future as well, since we will be doing more in the future. The next gathering is taking place actually with NYNOG on July 21st. We're not associated with NYNOG necessarily, but we certainly want to.
We are working with them.
But we are working with them. Yes. So
people.
We know people. So definitely look out for some of those invitations coming up. That's actually going to be here in Manhattan at the Marriott Marquis, and we will send you some information about that as it happens. And then you can always connect with us, follow us on Twitter, Meetup, Facebook, and then you can email us at hello@nynog.org, and we would love to keep you abreast of all the things that are coming. And then there will be another meetup after July, sometime in the September timeframe, since we're pitching around Marketplace Live. Anyway, all right, so it's time for the giveaways. Hopefully you all put your business card in there. Oh, I'm gonna let you draw. Yeah, ooh. All right, so the first one, yeah, is the PS4, right?
Yep.
And we're gonna do the PS4.
Doesn't come with the bag.
Now,
No bag, sorry.
so the PS4, so these gifts were given by Netflix and by Megaport. So thank you guys.
You have to say it like that.
Megaport. Is this our winner?
This is our first winner.
First winner goes to Michael Lee. Are you here, Michael Lee? Congratulations. You got a PS4. All right, this is the biggie. That was big too, though. Yeah, it's the drone. Drone. Walter. How do you say your last name, Walter? P-I-E-C. That's you, Walt. You want a drone. And you asked a question too. That's double points.
Make sure you register with the FCC.
Yes. Care. Do you actually have to get a license? We were just flying one of those. It takes like 2 days. $5 for a year. For a license for a drone. Have fun. That one's also really cool too. I'm just gonna geek out about this. Yeah. No, it's yours. Yeah. It'll actually know if it's gone too high or if it gets too close to someone. It'll back up. You can actually follow someone around with your little iPad. You would click on their face and it'll follow them around.
It'll follow you.
Yeah, it's awesome. So have fun with that. All right, guys. Enjoy yourself. Network for a while. We're going to be here, and we'll see you at the next NYNOG. Thank you, guys.
Good job speaking. I know. Well played. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Question about Lincoln West.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned you put everything on the. You were like, what did you say you were?